So we are live recording now. If you're watching this, you're watching Corporate Life is Hell, the twice monthly podcast, internet talk show, whatever we decide to call it this week. It is a conversation about corporate life and leadership. The thinking behind our title, Corporate Life is Hell, is that for most people who have spent enough time in the corporate world and maybe have spent enough time climbing the ladder of the corporate world, they have discovered somewhere along the line that it can feel like hell. The experience can feel like hell. It can be hell. And so the premise of the show is that when it's hell, it's due to failures in leadership. And while it's easy to point the finger at leaders around you, there's always good examples of bad leadership happening around you. There's only one leader that you can impact, that you can change, or even that you can take full responsibility for, and that's yourself. So this show is about your leadership and how do you show up fully to create what you want in the world. And if you're in the corporate world, it's how do you create an experience that isn't hell for yourself and for other people. So I'm joined by my most reliable co-host, Carl Deershaw. It's great to see you again, Carl.
Hey. Yeah, so weather out here in Colorado is really interesting today. We had a blizzard come through the other day, and it hit southern Colorado quite heavily. Things were shut down and still some schools out, and we got nothing up here in northern Colorado. So it's interesting, but we got lots of wind.
So I heard about it, and I thought it was in the Denver area. I know you're not in the Denver area. You're further north than that. But I heard they got like a foot in Denver.
Yeah, it depends on what part of Denver. The south end, yes. North end, no. So it's weird. Denver isn't that big, but sometimes this happens.
Well, I immediately thought of my years when I lived there. I was there for 11 years, and I actually usually enjoyed the blizzards, especially the early ones. You know, I never liked the spring, the ones in March. I was done, and those are the worst anyway because they're wet, heavy snow. Yeah. The ones in November, I was usually, all right, I'm ready for winter. This is going to be fun.
So how's the weather report in Texas?
Well, 2 nights ago, not last night, but the night before at 3:45 in the morning, I was in the closet with my family for a tornado warning.
Oh, yikes. So I assume you survived it.
In fact, I was ready to keep on sleeping, and my wife and kids were dragging me into the closet with them. Billy Bob says it touched down in his neighborhood. We may be neighbors because I heard one touchdown on 121. Billy Bob, I don't know if that's close to where you are. I'm in Castle Hills. Keller, okay. Yeah, I did end up in the closet with my family because I guess I'm not a complete idiot. And it passed pretty quickly. And today it's cool but beautiful and sunny out.
Well, good. Yeah. So we survived. So anyway, so you've got an interesting topic today, and I like the fact that up in the corner we have how do leaders fail? What does it look like? I think that's a good, interesting topic.
Yeah. So first of all, let me tell everybody that question: how do leaders fail? What does it look like? The reason that's there is that I in the chat typed /Q and then typed that question. So if you have a question that you want to get highlighted, type /Q and then your question, and it'll give us sort of an official question to answer, and we can put it up there even on the screen so everybody watching can see what question we're addressing. So let's kick this off with, why do you think leaders fail?
Well, so this is an interesting one because we all love pointing fingers at other people, right? And say, well, I'd be so much smarter. I'd know how to run this company if I were them. And, leadership didn't give us the opportunity and they got in the way. And, they're always talking a language that I don't understand and things like that. And so the real challenging thing is when I'm a leader, how is it that I fail in producing followership? How is it that I fail in producing results? And that's a lot more challenging at the personal level. So, for me, part of that is waffling around.
Indecision.
Yeah, been known to do that sometimes, and it's not really productive for anybody because they start to get the sense that, well, it's just sort of how you feel at the moment or the last person you talk to. I went through a phase of my career where I had quite a bit of that actually, and I figured out that I was being too influenced by the last person, and so that meant that I was jumping around and being inconsistent for the team overall.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from just not really knowing what you want and why you're leading in the first place.
Well, and from the need to be liked, so whether we like it or not, leaders go in directions that people don't know they want to go. Because if that wasn't true, they'd already be there.
Yeah, and they wouldn't be leading.
That direction. Right, yeah, and there'd be no need for leadership. So leadership sort of has an inherent tension that you need to take somebody direction and convince them that they need to go there and why, and then actually make the journey. And so in that situation, if you want to be liked too much, then you'll fall into this trap of, well, it's more important to be liked than to actually get results. However you measure the results, and so having that vision, having the idea of results, and then selling people on it. So that's another thing of why do leaders fail, is not being good at showing people why there's a reason to move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said a lot of good stuff in there. One of the thoughts that struck me while you were talking was how often we're actually not leading. If we don't really know where we're going and we're just being swayed by what people think and whether or not people like us and whether or not they think we've got the right ideas, then we're actually not leading. We're just following whatever. We're following the whims of other people's reactions to us. So right. I think that's what you struck on one of the first major failures of leadership, which is not having an internal sense of what it is that you want, where it is that you're going, that can weather the resistance that you will encounter. I mean, that the world is a messy place. Human beings are, we all have different opinions and desires and fears and aspirations. And so, it would be a boring world if everybody thought the same way, but we don't. And so it means that when we want something, we want to create something new or different in the world, we will inevitably face some resistance.
Yeah, or not necessarily active resistance. You look at it in the work world, is that, well, people share the common goal to keep their jobs and to, whatever they're doing, produce great products, deliver services, please the customer, and so there's some common ground that we would believe in, but so it's not like you're getting into head-on-head contests and wars with each other. It's not necessarily that. That does happen sometimes. But more usually it's just that people don't have a reason to care. Yeah. And so if they're not going to care, it's like, you go on, do that, have fun and everything like that, but I'm going to do what's safe. Well, if you're trying to drag people into territory that's not as safe and say, well, we really ought to take a little bit of risk and do this. That's leadership, but it also is helping other people get over the hump. So now the challenge is that when you are able to do that, people tend to actually like it because people like being involved in causes that matter. They like doing great stuff. They like being creative and energized and things like that. So you always have to have that further vision out that when we get there, it will be so much more glorious and our purpose will be fulfilled and people will be happy and stuff like that. And so the little bickering we have going on today, we'll get over that.
Yeah.
Let's keep walking on that journey.
Mm-hmm. That's the vision part, the painting a picture of where it is that we're going. Leaders have to have their own feeling and know where it is we're going. We're going to the top of that mountain, and it's going to be fantastic when we get there. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what it's going to feel like. Here's what you're going to feel like, and be able to convey that and share that with other people and inspire in other people some of the same feeling about what they'll get if they join the journey to this place that we're going, wherever it is. That's the vision part.
Yeah, and when you're trying to sell people, one of the important things is realizing that most people make decisions emotionally, and then they test it with their logic to see whether it's good, and they can justify it to themselves.
That's true.
And if you go too far that direction, we can get cynical about it. But the fact is that there's a big, huge emotional component. And so giving people a reason to care, I like that language because it's a little bit fluffy, but not too fluffy. It's like it's not just about feeling good, but it's something more impactful than just it's the next logical choice. My understanding is that's the way we're wired. We are emotional beings. And so most decision making, if not all, let's say most, has an emotional component to it. There's a belief about this. We're wired at the very basic level, to approach or avoid things. So, it's either fear, that thing's threatening, or attraction and pull, this thing is rewarding for me. At a neurological level, that's the way our brains work. And I think, the more sophistication you add on top of it, it still boils down to that same thing. And those are basically emotional aspects to our decision making. Do we feel good when we contemplate this decision? Does it stimulate the reward centers and we feel attracted to that option versus this option over there? Or maybe we avoid that option because we're afraid of it, because we have some unarticulated or maybe even unconscious fear of the risk that's involved with that choice over here. So all of that stuff is even happening underneath our consciousness, and it affects the way we make decisions. Absolutely. And so back to your question posed here is that one of the ways that I've failed as a leader in the past is I tend to be an introvert, and I tend to be an analytic. And so my comfort zone is to try to explain logically, and then when I get resistance, to kind of back off and not push it too much. And, for me, having to learn how to become a sales guy for my own business, how to be out there and making a difference in my business and to other people's businesses, that means you got to be outside the comfort zone fairly often. It's shocking how often this occurs.
I think so. I think if you're truly leading, then you're often going to be outside of your comfort zone. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, and people who are much more outgoing, they're extroverts and they like the sales positions and stuff like that. The way you fail in that situation is you're so far out ahead of people that you don't care if they're following along.
Yeah.
Which, and if you don't have followers, then you're not a leader, right? And so, there's dangers in all approaches. And that's one of the things that makes life and business interesting.
Yeah. So let me throw out another idea or concept about maybe how leaders fail or why leaders fail, and it has to do with connection. I think we've been talking about it, maybe without using that word, but I think leadership is about connection to what it is that I want. When I know who I am and what I want in the world, I'm able to lead from that place. When I'm connected to other people, I'm able to understand what motivates them, what they care about, and then I'm able to also help share with them what I care about and where I want to go. So if I have this vision of reaching the top of that mountain and I want to inspire this person to get there, I can be out in front, and disconnected from them and halfway up the mountain before I realize they're not following. or I can be connected with them and understand what it is they want from this, and how does what they want connect with what I want. And so it's that connection with what other people want. I think that's one of the reasons leaders fail the most, is that they're doing all the things. They're painting the picture of the vision. They're saying why we can't get there, what the compelling reason for change is. They're giving people a reason to change and all this. They're doing all of that, but they're maybe clueless to the fact that the leader is not really, that the other person is disconnected from them, is not resonating with what they have to say. So the best leaders, when they don't fail, is when they slow down and they connect with other people.
Well, we need to recognize that leadership is essentially a human to human.
That's right.
If it's not involving at least two people, then it's something else, which is perfectly fine. There's lots of parts of our lives that are introspective, and that's great. But the leadership aspect, and through our work, it's about interacting. Well, the way you have interaction is with communication. And then I would add to that alignment, because you can have lots of communication which is antagonistic, and that tends to erode leadership. And we've all known leaders who tend more towards the antagonistic approach. Mm-hmm. Famous military leaders or whatever. But
famous football coaches. I get into this debate with, let's say, some clients. I won't say one in particular, but some clients, about the Vince Lombardi model of coaching and leadership, and how effective that is. That's almost a topic for another show. But you're right. Sometimes there is sometimes leadership looks like I have to actually drag people there, or I have to push people there. I have to put them on my shoulders and get them there, and that's got its limits.
Yeah, and because it's messy, because we're humans, there's different approaches that work for different people. Some people really, really like to be pushed, and they need that, and it's constructive for them. But other people will melt down if you push them too hard. There's some limits. So this very individualistic.
Well, that gets to the connection piece that I was talking about. You have to actually stay connected to people and understand what's the impact that you're having. Are you losing people, or are you inspiring people? Are you bringing people along? Are people afraid, and are you able to support them and get underneath them and help them move past their own fear? So it's how connected are you with them? Chris has brought up a good point. He said leadership is a function of managing risk. And I had a small reaction to that at first. So I said, say more, Chris. And he said, great leaders balance the risk-reward scale and aren't afraid to push the edge of the envelope. So I think I agree wholeheartedly with that second part of it, that they do balance the risk-reward scale. Particularly, they're not afraid to push beyond the edge of the envelope. I think that's what leadership is. That's the difference between leadership and management. Management is, let's stay in the envelope. Let's keep, managing the stuff within the envelope. Leadership is, there's some really good stuff outside of this envelope. Let's get outside of the envelope. I suppose my reaction in the first comment, Chris, a function of managing risk, is sometimes I look at failures in leadership as the result of wanting to avoid risk. Now, sure, leaders need to not be reckless. At the same time, I think when I see leaders fail the most, it's because they're afraid, and they're afraid of taking a risk. They're, not even
especially in the corporate environment, right?
Yeah,
because there's a lot of other pressures to avoid risk, and the larger the company gets, the more that's true.
Bingo. There's more to protect.
Yeah, but there are some notable exceptions. I've been following Google since they first started up. And in the early days, the reason they succeeded is because they were weird and different and really went way outside. And they got a lot of attention for that, but they also had a lot of failures, and there were a surprising number of people that couldn't keep up with that and got burned out and left the company. As they've matured, now they're a large company. They've had to put processes in place, and now they're running the risk of not being creative enough. And they've gone to the extent of having an extra organization. I don't remember if it was called the X Laboratory or something like that, but they were, someplace where their mission in that organization is to get way the heck outside the box, and they're doing the self-driving cars and all that. But that's not most of the company. That's the special place now. And for all the people who are in the more normal sides of the company, they're start feeling like, the whole reason we joined Google 10 years ago was because we like this being on the edge of risk. And, they've kind of moved away from that a little bit. So it's interesting how these dynamics go.
That's the hardest thing for big companies to do. When I say corporate life is hell, I think I should qualify it and say I'm almost always talking about large companies. I think it happens in smaller companies, but then when it does happen in smaller companies, it's a direct result of a particular leader because they have so much direct impact on the company. But I think the larger companies get, the more and more institutional risk aversion there is. There's so much to protect. There's so much that we can't take the risk of blowing this revenue stream or of alienating all of our customers. So they start orienting more from a fear perspective, and it makes it harder for them to actually fail or allow failure to happen. Because Chris Floyd has made a couple of comments here. Failure is not a bad thing as long as the lessons learned are used to quickly and efficiently refocus. Absolutely. Great leaders don't fear failure. I would say innovation and growth and success is dependent on failure. Thomas Edison got to the light bulb that he got to because he failed, some several 100,000 times before that. To create anything new, you have to fail, which incidentally, I think is the way nature works and life works. Life finds a way. My kids watch Jurassic Park constantly, and remember the guy in Jurassic Park who said life finds a way. Evolution in life is built on figuring out what works. These things don't work and they die out, and so it's a constant evolution about trying and finding those things that work. That's how you get somewhere. And companies, big companies, they don't want to fail anymore. They fear that failure.
Yeah, and one of the points that I would make around this is that one of the key leadership skills is listening. And, we tend to think that leadership is all about telling other people what to do. But one of the reasons why people experience hell in large companies is because the company and their bosses and everything have stopped listening so much, because they're relying more on these other systems and conventions and rules and norms and all of that stuff. And so the organization is less responsive to the needs of the individual. It's not listening. In a small company, that listening is much more natural, because if I'm around somebody 10 times a day or 100 times a day, there's a good chance that I'm going to understand where they're coming from and their point of view and all that. But, I spent over the last 5 years of my corporate career working remote from all my teammates, either out of my house or just sitting in an office next to people I didn't work with. And so I was really distinctly feeling that lack of communication. I mean, we had enough communication tools to get the job done, and that was great and everything like that. But at the human level, to feel like my boss understands who I am and that I'm different than the other people she manages, that's hard to do when you're 2,000 miles away.
For me, that gets back to that idea of connection. Are people actually connecting with each other and hearing each other? You'll hear big companies all the time, they'll say the words that, hey, we need to listen to our frontline employees, the ones who are touching the customer. We need to understand what they're talking about. But they rarely do, because it's difficult to listen to those voices. You know, those voices of the individuals or the frontline employees, you know, they have real time intelligence about what our customers are doing, and yet we don't know how to listen to them because you know, maybe because the way they're communicating it is messy, maybe because, you know, it's not as sophisticated as we are up in here in our management circles and our charts and our graphs and everything. So we don't know how to listen and actually, you know, hear what we need to hear from the right people in the company.
Well, and, you know, if you think about it, the volume can be quite astounding because, you know, if I have my ivory tower over here, and then I've got 1,000 frontline employees that are interacting with the customers, you know, if every one of them sends one message a day, which really is not that much, I've got this deluge of 1,000 messages coming into my ivory tower. Yeah. And, you know, it's really hard, and it's random. You know, it's not put into nice, neat categories because the information you're getting is not in nice, neat categories.
Yeah. You know, I'll throw the last job that I had in the corporate world, I was responsible for listening to 150,000 frontline employees. It was a national restaurant chain, and we had 6,000 restaurants, and, you know, every restaurant had roughly 30 employees in it. And, you know, that was our challenge, was how do we learn from the front line here? And there's another kind of listening. Sure, there's the one-on-one listening. I need to understand what this person is saying, but when there's 150,000 of them, or let's go to the management level, you know, 6,000 restaurant managers, it becomes more difficult to listen individually. But what you have to do then is learn the skill of listening globally, of listening for, you know, being present to what's the energy coming from, you know, this collection, this collective consciousness out there, I'll say, you know, because it's 150,000 people out there who are experiencing something. How do you listen to what's coming, what's their experience, what's happening in their world, and, you know, be open to hearing it. If you try to listen to, you know, one individual at a time, then they all cancel each other out, and you can't make any sense out of it. But if you can listen globally, listen on a deeper level, you can get a sense of what it is that you need to hear. It's an openness that you need to have.
So it's almost the skill of watching a flock of birds, then, isn't it? Because when you're seeing a flock of birds, you're seeing not only a whole bunch of individuals, but also a collective direction. And
yeah,
but it's very dynamic, which is why I like the image.
Yeah,
you know, it can just take off in any direction that it wants to.
I appreciate that you said that, because the forum where I learned a lot of this leadership stuff that I'm out here saying used a flock of birds as one of our learning mechanisms, you know, and you can learn a lot just by watching, you know, how a flock of birds behaves, and it's amazing to watch.
And darn, I was going to copyright the concept. Not quick enough.
Yeah. All right. So fear of failure is one of the. So here's what we got. Why do leaders fail? Well, certainly fear of failure is the biggest one. I think they're afraid of failing, therefore they fail. Related to that is the whole safety thing and being risk averse. I have a lot more to protect, and so you know, I avoid taking the risks. The other one we talked about is not knowing about, you know, what it is that you want, not having a firm sense of where you want to go, maybe not having a vision for your own future or for the future of your organization or just the future of what you want.
So let's bring it down to the practical here, right? Because we're trying to help people who are in corporate environments trying to exercise some leadership, often bottom up. And so, you know, like I said at the beginning, it's real easy to talk about those guys at the top and how dumb they are, and they have no insight and they make mistakes all the time, and I wish they had courage and blah, 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 all that stuff. But, you know, coming back to the practical level, for me, how can I develop those skills so that it doesn't hold me back?
How? Well, my short answer to that is practice. But here's what I think it looks like. What I think it looks like is I have to, first of all, be willing to stick my neck out there and say something. So if I'm on the front lines, here's what I think happens. Here's what I see happen. It's not difficult for people to see what's wrong or what needs to be changed. That whole sort of vision of what it could be is often very easy for people to see, especially in lower levels of the organization, because Billy Bob is saying something right here about leaders lose their curiosity. I think when you're in the front line and you're working on what matters most to the company, you still have a great curiosity about how we could do things better. And so then you go and you pitch this or you talk about it and you sort of get shut down. You get a resistance from above because there's a fear there or whatever, a resistance to it often. And so you start to get jaded and you feel and you learn helplessness, to use a technical term out there, learned helplessness. You learn to feel helpless, which is part of the reason for corporate hell. So what it requires is to understand that that's the natural response you're going to get. You're going to get some resistance. Not everybody's going to think the way you do. And so if you can master that, so what happens is I disengage. I get, I put a lid on myself, or I hold back, or I quit bringing these things up. And so then I become marginalized, and corporate life is hell for me from now on. If I can accept that everybody gets to have their own opinion, and so how do I stay engaged and maybe come at it in a different way? How do I speak about it in a different way? How do I make a difference in my own world in my own way? This is about persistence for sure, but it's also and resilience, but it's also about just managing your own response, so that you start to grow the impact that you have on those around you.
So I really like this direction because for me, one of the most useful tools was to look at people who get who lead causes, charitable causes, social groups, things like that, stuff where there is not a paycheck at stake at all, and see what do they do to get people excited and aligned and contributing and on their side. So one of the examples I use sometimes is Habitat for Humanity. I happen to like the organization and do a lot of good stuff. But it's real interesting to watch them as a model of how do they engage to get people to contribute their valuable time and money to do this. Well, they talk about the cause. They talk about how it changes people's life. They make you feel good about your contribution, even if you showed up for a day of work and you were less than valuable. Because that happens to them a lot, right? They get a lot of unskilled labor out there that's trying to help, but it's always positive, engaging, appreciative, and they get people on side and supportive. Okay, now you can translate all of that into the corporate environment. If I'm down at the bottom of an organization and I'm trying to sell my bosses on this great idea that I have, well, first I need to understand where they're coming from so that I can speak their language. I've got to develop something that not only grabs their head, but grabs their heart a little bit too. Even the most logical of people still have a heart, and they need to care about things. And then, but to treat it as an engagement exercise rather than I need to convince them. I need to get them on side. And that getting on side is exactly what leadership is about.
Yep, you got it. You just nailed it right there, I think. One of the failures of leaders is thinking that it's their job to change other people, to convince somebody else to do it my way, to drag people along. How do I change that person's mind to see things the way that I see it? That's how leaders fail, because that's not what leadership is. Leadership requires people who choose to follow you. And so that choice is the most important part. How do you connect with them and understand them in such a way that you touch them emotionally whatever, you connect with them such that they say, yeah, you're speaking my language. I'm in your tribe. Yes, I want to follow you.
And it's totally intimidating to do that with your bosses or, internal partners in your organization. I got to go over to that sales department and convince them that they care about my idea. Oh, I don't know any of them, and they're scary people, and they speak a different language, and blah blah, all this junk that comes at you and erodes your self-confidence. And part of becoming a leader is recognizing that you can work through all of that stuff. There's solutions for it. People have done this since the dawn of humanity, for good and evil. We've got all kinds of stuff, but people have gotten involved in being emotionally engaged and logically engaged and contributing their time, their talent, their money, their resources and everything that they have. This has been going on forever. So it's a solvable problem. That does not mean that it's easy or trivial. If you're one person in a company of 10,000, you feel like a small voice, and you are, okay? But just because I'm one voter in a country of 300 million, does that mean that it's unimportant for me to vote? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, some people have put forth that theory, but I have to choose to say, no, it's important for me to affect what I can affect, So I'm going to maybe spend most of my energy on the local issues where I have a bigger voice, and I'm choosing the national candidates. Well, I'll try to make the best choice I can, but I'm not going to fret about it as much as I would with the local issues where maybe there's only 1,000 people voting. So I actually have an important say in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to feel like you're making a difference. And so part of that is choosing where will I put my focus and my attention so that I can feel like I'm making a difference. Because if I don't feel like I'm making a difference, I disengage. I give up.
Well, so maybe this is a topic for another show, is about self-leadership, because all of this applies to yourself as well. If you're not engaged and your heart is not in what your head is in, then how the heck are you going to be able to engage anybody else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interestingly, I assumed that this was about that anyway. This show was about self-leadership.
Well, but it's a deeper topic, and we are kind of running out of time here.
You're right about that. I had a thought that was going through my mind as you were speaking. I want to throw that out there, and then maybe put something on the table to finish with. The thought was just about how so often we see other people. We don't always admit this to ourselves, or we're not really aware of it, but we see other people as objects instead of as human beings. We imagine that there are these things out there that disagree with us, and we need to change their mind, or we need to get them aligned, or whatever. And we forget that it's actually a human being to connect with, and the degree to which we connect with them, we have an impact on them. So that's a great book for that is Leadership and Self-Deception. One of my favorite leadership books, and the one that I make every one of my clients read. But for a closing topic here, I think a lot of people, there's this idea of leaving the corporate world. And Carl, you had suggested that might be one of our topics coming up. I know there's a lot of energy out there. It's funny because when I coach corporate executives, just about without fail, there always comes a time when people say, it'd just be a heck of a lot easier if I could, run my own thing or be out on my own and, start my own company.
Yeah, because that's so simple to do.
I know. But there is, so that usually opens up the whole topic of, hey, it's not necessarily easier. Okay, you get all the control now, and yet, control is not all you need. You still need to be able to lead people. But nevertheless, there is a movement, I think. I don't know what the numbers are, but it feels to me like more people are leaving the corporate world to try to start their own thing than maybe in the past. And
yeah, it's definitely a rapidly growing trend here this year. I've seen that.
Yeah. So what was I going to say about that? So there's there's a balance here. Why do you do it? Do you do it because you're trying to escape something? I'm trying to escape corporate hell, and I think it's going to be better on the other side. Or is it that I have that vision for what I want to create, and maybe this organization I'm a part of is not necessarily aligned with that, so I'm going to go out on my own. One, I think, is better than the other. I'll just leave it at that and see what you have to say.
Well, I mean, you're obviously a little bit biased in this, as am I. But I think you're absolutely right that taking a leap without having direction is necessary sometimes, but it's dangerous because sometimes it's just frying pan into the fire. It's like you created a bunch of new problems. I've seen that happen a fair bit during the recession, where people were laid off and they said, well, it doesn't look like anybody's going to hire me, so I'm going to go off and start my own business and see if I can make that work. But they didn't really have any direction to it other than just, well, somebody told me I could make a bunch of money this way.
Yeah.
And the fact is that rarely is that true. Usually you have to work hard at it for 5 years or more before you start seeing the return from your efforts. So it takes a long time. But now what's shifting in 2015 is I see a lot more people who are electing to leave corporate, sometimes because they want to escape, but sometimes because they're thinking, what's the next stage of my life that I want to dedicate myself to? That's an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
And, but I do think that it's a deeper topic for a future show that we should cover.
I think I've been on a couple of shows with that topic, and it generates a lot of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap it up, because I need to take off here in a few minutes, I'd be interested to ask Mike, what did you take away from this discussion? Something that you can apply, and then I'll maybe chip in the same thing myself.
Reminders about fear of failure. So I've always struggled with that one. And even though I've taken some big risks in my life, particularly recently, 4 years ago, I quit the corporate world to start my own thing. I think I still settle into that place of safety, and so I'm looking for new ways to create something new. And I think maybe getting over my own resistance, my own fear about failure is what I need to do right now. One of the things I'm working on is I'm trying to build my public speaking side of my business. And I have a speech that I've been thinking about, but not necessarily creating yet. So maybe what I need to do here is commit to having that speech sort of branded and ready to market before our next 2-week show from now.
Well, that would be fun.
Yeah.
So the whole fear of failure thing really comes out strongly for me as well. That is something that I'm struggling with right now. I am actually starting to work on people who are exiting corporate and going out and starting businesses. That's something that I'm putting together some programs for. But I'm realizing that I have my internal resistance to work through there as well. I see the opportunity and it's great and everything. But, going and taking the leap and saying, all right, I've got to put together all these programs. I've got to communicate it to a broad range of people and get out there and make the difference that I can actually make to people who are going through this. So there's definitely something that's holding me back that I'm working through. And I have a discussion with my coach this afternoon that we're going to talk about that topic because it's a powerful one for me right now. And then the other thing is that this discussion brought up some really good thoughts around clarity of communication, not only the logical side, but the emotional side, and about engagement and stuff. And so, that's good stuff. And I need to incorporate that a lot more into the discussions I'm having.
Yeah. I almost made this show about heart versus head when it comes to leading. And I couldn't find the right topic title for it. So I went with Why Do Leaders Fail? But I think what I had in mind was because they fail to bring their heart to it.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. You leave your heart out of it and you fail as a leader.
Yep, but it's scary to jump in with both feet and just say, okay, I'm going to be engaged. I'm going to do this. Yeah. That's the fear of failure comes out and whacks you in the face. So
yeah.
Anyway, so
I want to thank. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I do need to take off, and so I wanted to wish you and everybody else here a happy Thanksgiving. Assuming that you're in the U.S. If you're in another country, maybe that's a different kind of discussion, because I know that the Canadians did Thanksgiving last month, so they're all over it now. But we've got to go out and cook some turkey and have fun.
Thank you for that, Carl. Yeah, I offer the same thing, and I want to especially thank Billy Bob and Chris for joining us out there. We had a small group today, but good engagement from you guys out there. And Carl, thanks for joining me in here.
Absolutely. Well, have a good holiday, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, okay?
All right. Bye, guys.